Welcome to the Astranti Preseen video series for the November 2018 strategic case study on pharmaceutical organization Novak Pharmaceuticals. So before we begin the analysis, I'll just tell you a bit about who I am and also how we are going to go through this video series. So first of all, my name is Peter Steth. I am the head of strategic case study here at Astranti. I've been teaching the strategic case study since 2016, and prior to that I taught the management and operational case study. I'm also heavily involved in writing the various mock exams that we produce for our course, and also marking those mocks as well, seeing where students are going right, seeing where they are going wrong. And I use that information to help feed back into my video analysis as well, common mistakes that students make. I've also written several of the free study texts that you can use here at Astranti. So on to the video series itself. Essentially, we're going to go through the Preseen section by section, picking out the various key points, various things that are going to be important for your exam. Also look at how real world companies, or how companies in this actual industry, obviously it's a fictional company in a fictional industry, fictional country, etc. But there are plenty of parallels with the real world, and that's what we will be tying the analysis to. So look at various key business models as well, some of the things that you will have learnt during your objective test studies, how we can apply some of those models to the case. So SWOT analysis, stakeholder matrices, and so on. We'll also look at likely exam issues that could arise, as in when we're looking through the analysis, are there particular points they keep referring to? Is that a hint on where the examiner is thinking they may take the exam? What previous questions have come up in previous exams when this kind of information has been given, and so on. And also just key exam hints and tips as well, things to prepare you for the day, ways in which you can perhaps streamline your information, streamline the information within the Preseen so that it helps you for the exam. We then look at the strategic analysis, our strategic analysis video, which looks at all the different models, lots of the big models, and applies them directly to the Preseen. So we'll be looking at where the company is, where the company wants to be, and how it's going to get there using various different theories. And we'll conclude the video series by looking at the top 10 most likely issues. These will be based on previous issues that have come up in previous case studies. It will also be based on how much weight is given to particular topics, to particular things within the Preseen. And how this actual series will work is, when we're going through it section by section, I'm going to assume that we have no prior knowledge as we go through it, as in the whole point of this video series should be as if you and I were looking through the videos together, or looking through the Preseen together. So I'm not going to act as if I've read through the entire Preseen when I'm going through each individual page. We're going to look at it as if we're seeing everything for the first time. So we're not going to be ruling anything out at any particular stage because of what may come later in the Preseen or what may come later in information given to us by CIMA. We're just going to assume that every single thing is relevant. We're going to assume that every single sentence is the first time that you or I have seen it, and we're analysing it based on its own individual, mutually exclusive merits. What I suggest is that you read through a particular section and make notes, and then come back to the start of the video and we'll go through it together. And as already mentioned, at the end of the Preseen analysis, we will then move on to the strategic analysis and top 10 most likely issues, which in a sense summarize everything that we will have done throughout the Preseen. And as you're making notes on the Preseen, remember this is the context for which the exam will be based. So there will be a lot of information here that perhaps won't necessarily be relevant in terms of answering the question. They're not going to be testing us on our knowledge of the pre-scene. They're not going to be testing us on things specifically in the pre-scene. It is the background information that will give us context when we are answering our questions in the exam. So if they are asking us a question on whether they should go ahead with this particular project and give us some information on that project, we will have background information on the industry, background information on the company that will allow us to pinpoint the suitability of this project based on what we know about the organization. Remember that you shouldn't be pre-writing anything based on the pre-scene. So don't assume that they're going to ask us a question on this. I'm going to write out a mock answer based entirely on this information in the pre-scene, and I'm going to ignore anything that comes up in the unseen, because remember, the unseen is the actual exam. The material given to us in the unseen should take precedence over material in the pre-scene if it contradicts. So don't write anything based on the pre-scene or pre-write anything based on the pre-scene, because it is the background information for us to deal with it. It's not the unseen, it's not the exam, it's just the background information. But saying that, we must use the information in the exam, but we must tie it back to the context of the unseen. And your recommendations must be consistent with strategic analysis. So if when we're going through our strategic analysis and we're looking at suitable projects, we're looking at suitable things for the company to undertake, if your recommendation completely flies in the face of all that analysis, it flies in the face of everything that's in the pre-scene, everything's in the unseen, then you're likely to get marked down because it is not a sensible conclusion. We're going to start by looking at this first page here. Now, when students get the pre-scene, a lot of the time they skip through to the bit about the financial statements, or they skip through to the risk register or the board structure, things that they know about, things that are in a sense tangible, with weight and with meat to them, so to speak. But actually, just as the pre-scene is context to the unseen exam, the introduction to your role, what you're expected to do in the case study exam, is the context to the rest of the pre-scene itself. There's a lot of information here, despite it only being 3 small paragraphs, that is going to be really useful as we carry that forward throughout the rest of our analysis. The first thing that you'll pick up here is that we are a senior manager in the finance function at Novak Pharmaceuticals. It's very important that we are playing the role that we are supposed to play. CIMA themselves released an article talking about how important it was that students recognize that they were playing the role. They were playing the role of a senior manager. And so when you are answering your questions in the exam, you need to be acting like a senior manager. We are reporting directly to the board. So when we are answering our questions, we need to be giving clear, concise information to strategic level personnel who are going to take that information and make decisions that affect the organization as a whole. This is not at a department level or on a production line level like you may have done at management or operational case study. You need to be presenting information that is going to allow strategic level personnel to make decisions. So think about the organizations that you work for. Think about the board members at the organization you work for, or yourself if you yourself are a board member. What kinds of information do you want? Do you want to be given huge amounts of figures and asked to make something of that? No, you want a clear picture, a clear recommendation on what to do going forward. You want the information to be summarized for you. And so when you are answering questions in the exam, you need to be thinking about this. You need to be giving the board members information that they can make decisions based on. They don't want to have to do the work themselves. You need to give them a clear recommendation. And within the remit of this strategic level advice, you're also expected to advise them on special projects and strategic matters. So with special projects, we need to be thinking about project management. There have been plenty of instances in the past where in the strategic case study exam, students have been asked to analyze a project and to talk about how they would manage the project from start to finish. You need to be thinking about your E2 studies here. Now, you're not going to be directly tested on lots of things from E2, so please don't go off and re-revise everything from E2. But just a point here that CIMA do consider things that you will have learned in the past to be assumed knowledge, and therefore it is okay for them to talk about it. So you need to think about E2, you need to think about the process of project management, appointing a project leader, analyzing the various different steps, looking for risks, looking for things that could go wrong, looking for your lead time, and all these other issues. And also with strategic matters, we need to be thinking about the organization's strategy. Are the things you're suggesting tying in with the corporate strategy? If they aren't, then regardless of how profitable they may be for the organization, perhaps they aren't things that the organization should be undertaking. Because if it's not going to help us achieve our overall goal, our overall strategy, perhaps it's not worth doing. We'll be taking resources off of projects, off of operations that are helping us achieve our goals and putting them onto this new project. But because this is the strategic case study exam, we can't just stop there. CIMA directly mentioned as part of their description of your role that you need to consider the risks of anything you suggest and also how it will be financed, how it will be funded. So you also need to keep P3 and F3 in mind. In a sense, when you are analysing a project, when you are answering a question, you need to answer it from a strategic level, as in how it is going to benefit the organisation, how it ties in with the company's strategy, but also need to consider the risks involved with the project and also your resources and your funding, because this is how you illustrate to the examiner that you are worthy of passing your CIMA exams, because you are a well-rounded management accountant who can consider all the various different variables that impact the success of a project. And it's for this reason that models such as the SAF model, where you are considering the strategy, where you are considering stakeholders and all stakeholders that will be affected by your outcome, by your decision, by your recommendation, and also the level of finance involved. How much money do we have in cash reserves? How much money is this going to cost us? How much money do we have set aside for working capital, etc.? Because these are all considerations that a strategic level student should be considering. And on the next line, we have a section here talking about how Novak is based in Kronland, where the currency is the C dollar. And whenever you see a currency, you should be thinking about economic factors. So we know that there is a currency. We know that they have told us there is a currency, which means we have to think about all the different financial aspects about that. So you're thinking about your Pestel analysis, you're thinking about economics, thinking about interest rates, inflation rates, exchange rates, all these things that you will have learnt in your F3 studies that can have an impact on the way in which an organization conducts its business. So if the interest rates are higher in Kronland, if the interest rates have been put up by the Central Kronland Bank, then that means that debt financing becomes more expensive, which means the project's profitability may decrease when you are analysing a project. When inflation rates and exchange rates change, that could affect how much you can import or export into your organisation. Does it become cheaper to export your products overseas rather than to sell it in Kronland? And will that affect how we conduct our business? Most pharmaceutical organizations are actually quite large global organizations and quite decentralized, with different headquarters within the different countries that they operate, because they are trying to engage with the local market on a better, more in tune basis. So we're thinking about culture there as well. Will the different cultures of the different countries affect how we conduct our business? It affects our marketing, it affects the way in which the organizations themselves are structured, how the corporate hierarchy within those different countries is, etc. We can also see that Kronland requires organizations to prepare their financial statement in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standards. And this makes it easier for the organization when it operates in many different countries, because they can standardize their financial reporting across the different countries. They don't have to prepare their statements in a different way in every single country, which causes problems when it is all consolidated back to the head office. And on the note of consolidating, we need to think about translation and transaction risk. So again, you can see how we're tying everything together. We're tying risk with financial standards, with foreign exchange rates, and this is part of your SCS strategic level studies, is to be able to integrate all these different parts of the syllabus together. And translation rate is the risk that when you convert the value of an asset in an overseas subsidiary back to your head office, you lose money, or you lose out on the value of that asset by the result of the exchange rate fluctuations. And transaction risk is the same, but for transactions overseas. When you are selling products internally through transfer pricing to one subsidiary to another in another country, you lose out because of the changes in the exchange rate. And Novak is quoted on the Kronlund Stock Exchange. So this would be considered a strength of the organization when we are comparing our SWOT analysis or compiling our SWOT analysis, because there's access to equity financing, and also it helps with attracting appropriate staff members. There's prestige involved in working for a quoted organization. And in this kind of industry, which relies on knowledge, relies on having the best personnel, that's really a strength of the organization that will help them attract the better personnel. And in Kronlund, all quoted organizations are expected to adhere to the Kronlund Code of Corporate Governance. Now, this, of course, should be setting off alarm bells with regards to the UK Code of Corporate Governance, which is mandatory for all UK-based quoted companies. If they don't adhere to it, they have to explain why. And it's very useful to adhere to a code of corporate governance, not just from a mandatory perspective, because you have to, because it's all about running an organization in the best interests of all stakeholders. And another thing that you as strategic level students need to be thinking about is how each of the things you suggest affects the various different stakeholders. We can't just do things for the shareholders. We can't just do things for the employees. We can't just do things for the customer. We have to come to a decision, to come to an appropriate conclusion which benefits all parties insofar as much as is possible. So even after a few sentences, we're already starting to draw some conclusions. We're already starting to see some potential issues that could arise in the exam. Potential issues that could arise in the exam could be to do with finance, to do with funding, to do with translation risks, etc. It could be to do with the Code of Corporate Governance. Perhaps Novak have appointed someone to the board who is a relative of another board member, and that, of course, breaches the Code of Corporate Governance if they can't prove that they are the best person for the job. And also, because it is a pharmaceutical company, because pharmaceutical companies have been in the news a lot recently, and a big issue with regards to pharmaceutical companies is ethics. For example, recently, the drug that was used to treat HIV was purchased by another organization, and the price was put up to an extraordinarily high level. And that caused a huge backlash to the organization, because remember, when you're talking about pharmaceuticals, you're talking about people's lives. You're talking about people who need these medicines to keep living, and if you put an extortionately high price on them, you could actually cause people to die if they cannot afford to purchase the medicines. So ethics is always going to be a substantial issue when it comes to pharmaceuticals, and ethics is also one of the big CIMA topics. It has come up in almost every case study exam since the syllabus was changed in 2015. And at strategic level particular, it comes up around two out of every 5 variants. So 40% of you watching this video right now are likely to get a question on ethics in your exam. So we'll move on now to the second page of the Preseen, which looks at the industry background. So looking at the pharmaceutical industry now. And it starts off by saying that pharmaceutical companies develop and manufacture pharmaceutical drugs that are used as medications to prevent, cure, and treat diseases. So again, tying back to what I was saying about ethics, this is what we are trying to achieve. We are trying to create prescriptive drugs that prevent, cure, and treat diseases. So that is our end user, someone who has a disease or someone who needs to be cured for something. If we put the price up too high, we could literally be causing someone to die as a result of it. And in this day and age where it's very important to be considered an ethical company, to be a company that is socially responsible, this is a big issue. So again, already reiterating the fact that ethics and CSR are likely to be big issues running through this Preseen. And it is a major industry that employs over 5 million people worldwide, and products exceeded $1.1 trillion in the last year. So it's an enormous industry. And so what we can read from this is there's likely to be a lot of competition. There's likely to be a lot of other large organizations all competing to be the company that produces that drug that prevents this particular disease or treats this particular disease. But on the flip side of that, there are some positives to it. We know that it's a large industry. There's a lot of money in this industry. So it's a strength for us that we are operating, that we are an established member of this industry. And because there are 5 million people working worldwide in this industry, it also shows that there is a significant talent pool. There's going to be a lot of people who we can potentially hire to our organization. And this kind of industry, pharmacy, it's a bit like medicine, it's a bit like technology, a bit like consultancy, where knowledge is key. And therefore, having the right people with the right knowledge is really important. Because there are so many people working in this industry, there's a large talent pool for us to choose from. And the industry that is defined in this Preseen is products involved in the managing of healthcare of human patients. And so this excludes areas such as veterinary medicines and health-related products that are not prescription medicines. And prescription medicines are things that you need to go to a qualified medical professional who will then write you a prescription for that medicine. So we're already seeing the other kinds of areas that are related, but ones that Novak may not currently be operating in. We've got veterinary medicines, we've got non-prescription medicines. These are potential opportunities. And there's evidence that other pharmaceutical companies do this, because we've got some information here saying that some pharmaceutical organizations engage in non-pharmaceutical activities, such as the manufacture of medicines that can be purchased without a prescription. So this would be your more generic products. It would be your ibuprofen, your paracetamol, your hay fever tablets, things that you can go into a supermarket and purchase. You don't need to go to a pharmacy. And the good thing about these kinds of products is that it opens you up to a much larger, much wider market base, because anyone can go into a supermarket and purchase these sorts of products and do on a regular basis, whereas there's a much smaller percentage of people that are actively going to a doctor to get medicine for specific ailments. So when we're thinking of our various different strategies, we can look at the ANSOS matrix. Now, where would something fit into the ANSOS matrix here? Now, we'd be basically creating a new product and selling it to a new market, because a lot of the people purchasing painkillers may not be people who have been to the doctors to get different medicines before, because we'd be selling directly to the consumer, whereas at the moment we would be selling directly to the pharmacists and directly to the pharmaceutical wholesalers. So it would be related diversification, but it could also be market development, because we could perhaps take some of our existing products and see if we can get them relicensed for non-pharmaceutical means, or if we can adapt the formula slightly so that they are not quite as strong and therefore don't need to be prescribed by a pharmacist. And some more evidence of the competition in the industry here. You remember that I posted on the screen about 5 forces the competition was likely to be high. More reiteration there, the pharmaceutical industry has many significant companies, with no single company accounting for more than 10% of the global market. So a lot of competition from different organizations, but it's relieved slightly from the fact that there isn't one large player that monopolizes a lot of the market. And most companies operate globally, locating both factories and research centers in a strategic manner with a view to building relationships with local markets. So I've already mentioned this on the previous page, talking about how this would impact culture of the work environment, but also the culture of the people that you are selling to, the way in which business is conducted. And it's useful to have a decentralized organization for this purposes, because your specific centers in each country can be staffed with people who are native to that country, who understand that market, rather than it all being passed down in a one-size-fits-all from a centralized head office. It's also relevant for pharmaceutical companies because certain countries may have higher rates of other diseases. A developing nation may have a higher prevalence of diseases compared with a developed nation. And therefore, if you were to set up in that particular country, that developing country, it's more likely that there would be specific medicines that were more in demand than they would be in the developed country. And that's why it's useful, again, to have a decentralized approach. So it's not, demand levels aren't coming down from a head office. And having a local presence really can make a difference to the extent by which drugs are licensed and prescribed. Remember that the medical profession is strongly regulated, and if doctors make too many wrong decisions, or they are doing things for financial means rather than for caring for the patient, they can be struck off. And so they need to have trust in the company. And if it's just some big foreign company that they've never really heard of, then they're less likely to put trust in that organization than perhaps one that they have been aware of for many years, one that is well renowned within the particular country. So trust, having the trust of the medical practitioners is incredibly important here. And there's a chart here indicating different pharmaceutical companies with their revenues and their market shares. And you can see that just as the Preseen stated, no one company is significantly larger than all of the other companies. We've got the market leader here, Horta, and yes, they are quite high. They have quite high revenue compared to the other companies, but it's not a huge monopolizing company. If that were the case, we would expect them to be many times the size of the other organizations, and they aren't. But one thing to point out here that is quite important is just how much revenue can be generated from other healthcare. Now we've got our company here, Novak, and we can see that they sit somewhat in the middle, and they are one of the leaders in the pharmaceutical market, and they make a reasonable amount of money. You can see here nearly 80 billion in sales, or 80 billion in revenue, and as a result they are worth about 7% of the global pharmacy market. And so that brings it with the advantages of being a large company. It will help with your competitive forces, will help with your supply power and your buyer power. But one thing that is worth noting is, despite being worth 7% of the pharmaceutical market, despite having revenue of nearly 80 billion dollars, there are actually a couple of companies who use the fact that they have a presence in the other healthcare market to actually generate more revenue. If you look particularly at Trend here, despite only being worth around 3% of the pharmaceutical market, the fact that they are such a big player in the other healthcare market actually gives them a revenue that is superior to Novak's. So further evidence that there's real opportunity in getting into this other healthcare market. So ibuprofen, paracetamol, hay fever tablets, allergy tablets, those sorts of things that sell far more wide scale in supermarkets, in regular grocery stores, etc., is definitely worthwhile. But it could be that that market is more heavily dominated. Because if you look at these companies here, they all have a reasonable share in the pharmaceutical market, and they're all fairly similar, some bigger than others, but no one going more than 8% or so of the market. But if you just look at the other healthcare markets, only a few companies that are heavily involved in the other healthcare market. And Horta and Trend have a much larger proportion of that market. So it could be difficult to break into it. Next page we're going to look at looks at the research and development process in the pharmaceutical industry. As I've already mentioned, this is the kind of industry where a lot of it is down to research and development. More investment in research and development would be a key indicator of a business's performance. So when you're looking for your critical success factors and your key performance indicators with regards to the company, these are the kinds of things we need to look at. How much money they are investing in research and development. Because in this particular industry, it's all about creating that product that is going to generate a lot in revenue. And it goes on to explain this in the Preseen, where it talks about how that generally in the field, sales and operating profits are driven by the success and failure of launching new products and in maintaining the market position of existing products, and how the prosperity of individual companies doesn't reflect the strengths and weaknesses of the pharmaceutical market as a whole. One company could produce some sort of new life-saving product and suddenly would go from being fourth or fifth to being the first in the industry because of the success of that particular product. So it's very tight margins here where organizations can change their position, fluctuate quite rapidly depending on the particular products that they are producing. And so it goes on to say, for example, an antibiotic might be used on license for the treatment of a particular type of infection. And the drug that is regarded as the most effective for a common disease can generate massive amounts of sales, and the company that manufactures them can make the most of their profits from a few key products. So we're talking about that Pareto analysis issue that you may have looked at in your P2 studies, where 80% of your revenue can come from just 20% of your products. So the success of a few products is critical to the success of an organization as a whole. And whilst we don't have any information about the specific products that Novak produces at the moment, we need to keep that in mind when we do come onto that section, because a few of Novak's products are probably producing a huge majority of that near 80 billion dollars in revenue. And so it's critical to the organization to maintain the success of those products. If the patents on them are running out, we need to take mitigating actions. Either we can extend the patent or see if we can use the brand position that we have to ensure that even once the patent ends and other companies can produce that same product, that we are still the market leader. We are maintaining that market position. And because it's such a fine margin, leads like this can be lost very, very quickly if a competitor develops a superior product in that category. So if we have the antibiotic that produces the best results of a common disease and we're making most of our revenue from that, if the patent runs out and a competitor, if Horta comes out with a superior product out of nowhere, then our revenue, our lead in that area can disappear overnight, and all of a sudden we've lost billions in revenue. So constantly investing in research and development to produce new products that can be licensed, that can be patented, is incredibly important to the organization. And investing and producing new products is a key competence of an organization and something that we can never fall back on. But this also works in two ways, or it works in both ways. Whilst we may lose out as a result of a competitor making a superior product, we can look to make superior products from ones that our competitors make. So it's both an opportunity and a threat. in that whilst we may lose out, we may also gain. One thing that we also need to look at is our pricing strategy here. If we produce the one product that is the most effective use for a particular disease or treatment, then we can generate massive sales. So we can price at a premium level because there is nothing better on the market. However, we do have to balance this with ethics. And if we produce a product that is the only product that can cure a certain disease, charging an enormous fee for it so that people who need the particular product have to remortgage their house just to afford the pharmaceuticals, then that is going to be considered an ethical issue. But we have to flip that and balance that with the business needs. If a lot of our products are not generating a lot of revenue, we rely on a few key products, and that's also got to make the company profitable and also pay for all the investment in new products, then we have to get a reasonable profit from that product, because we're not going to be able to invest money in research and development if we're not getting enough money from particular products. And as the Preseen goes on to say, it's a very, very costly and time-consuming process. And we've got the 6 different stages here in testing a product. So the initial stage, research and preclinical testing. And even then, this is when the drug is discovered and tested. So there'll be more input before this. We'll put more research into potential causes of diseases and potential ways in which to cure it. And this can take years and costs millions of dollars. We then go through the various different stages in testing. So we test on healthy volunteers to determine the side effects. We then test on a small sample of patients to determine the effectiveness of it, and then a large-scale study to determine the effectiveness of it. And all of this can take years. So we've got the large-scale registration study, which is taking 2 years, the testing on a small sample, which takes a year, testing on healthy volunteers, which can take months, and all of it costing millions. In fact, the large-scale registration study costs hundreds of millions in dollars. It then needs to go on to your regulatory review. So this will be the respective regulatory bodies within each of the countries in which you operate who can approve or disapprove of the product. So the regulatory panels will be key stakeholders to the organization. And so by the time a product is actually launched, it could have already cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to produce. This is before we even bring in the cost of marketing, the cost of the sales force to sell it to the various different pharmacies. So you really do have to make a lot of money from the product, because it's already the product is already in debt to the organization, so to speak, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So we have to make hundreds of millions of dollars from a particular product before it's even paid for itself, before it's even broken even. And if you are considering the fact that only a couple of our products will be generating a lot of our revenue, we actually will have lots of products that have cost hundreds of millions of dollars that aren't making millions of dollars. And so the successful products not only have to pay for themselves, they have to pay for the other products that aren't as successful. So this is the argument from the pharmaceutical industry, that the reason why drugs are so expensive is because there are so many costs that they have to pay for. And if it wasn't for the fact that they were sold for such a high price, the products wouldn't exist in the first place, because there wouldn't be the money to invest in the research and development. And pharmaceutical companies are constantly conducting research into the creation of new products. And this research may be conducted in-house in corporate research facilities or through the funding research of university departments. So more key stakeholders here, university departments and also staff, and how critical it is to the organization to have the access to the best possible information, the best possible staff. And the initial studies, initial testing is done on samples of human tissue or animals. So key thing here is animals. That's a big ethical issue, animal testing. A lot of groups protest against the testing on animals. And it's one of these things that's becoming more and more prevalent as there's been a rise in veganism, and there's been a rise in social media, and more people being aware of these kinds of issues when they happen. What used to be done behind closed doors can now be presented to the wide world, the entire world, and that can have a real negative impact. If it's found that Novak has been doing all this horrible testing on animals and everyone's talking about boycotting Novak, and all of a sudden the pharmacies that we sell to are saying we don't want to be seen as dealing with you because that affects our own brand, that can have a huge impact. Particularly given that it goes on to say that a lot of this can be done using computer models. It can be used to predict the interaction between modules of chemical compounds and diseased cells. And so one thing that this does mean for the organization, does mean for Novak, is that they need to ensure they have the best possible computer systems. We're looking at our pestle analysis again here. We're looking at technology, ensuring they have the best information technology systems, the best softwares involved to ensure that they are getting the best possible results. As having the right system in place could save you a fortune in the long run. If the computer system can tell you exactly what is going to happen, if you've got the right big data system that's comparing all the different variables and telling you exactly what's going to happen, you may be able to avoid testing on human tissues or animals. And also it could save you a lot of money in the long run, because, as the Preseen goes on to say, the discovery is only the start of the process. There are several stages, and as a result of these different stages, a lot of projects fail before they are launched. It's estimated that 90% of all projects are abandoned during research and testing. And if we go back to our chart here, we could already have spent millions by the time we get to perhaps this point or this point or this point, and we have to abandon it. And so if we've got 90% of our products costing us millions and never getting to the market, this is a further evidence of the fact that we need to sell our successful products at a premium price to pay for all the failed products. And before it can be sold commercially, it must undergo extensive testing. This is absolute law, cannot be broken, and so because of this, we are going to have to accept the fact that a lot of our products may be abandoned during the research and testing. And what this means for the organization, means for Novak, is that they have to have a good cash strategy, a good financial strategy to pay for all its working capital needs, its day-to-day expenses, whilst still being able to afford to take huge hits on products that are abandoned during the testing stage, because we can't afford to not pay our staff salaries, particularly given that staff are so important to the organization. So a good financial strategy where we have a lot of money in reserve is critical. But the ones that can move on to the testing stage then need to go through several stages of testing, and this is to find the consequences, to find the side effects of the drugs. And it's important to do this because it's important the side effects are known and that they are manageable. And so a very classic example, which I'm sure you've seen on the side of many products that you've taken in the past, that drowsiness is a common side effect. And so patients are warned they should not drive or operate machinery when they have taken the particular pharmaceuticals. But there may be ones that are actually really severe, with really severe side effects. And that's not to say they can't be sold, because if they can treat a very serious illness, then doctors may decide that it's still the best course of treatment. I'll give you an example. This isn't perhaps a drug, but it's still a treatment for a disease. You think about radiotherapy and chemotherapy. These are horrible things that do horrible things to the human body, but they help treat cancer, which is far worse to the human body. So even though chemotherapy is an absolute last resort, very harmful to the human body, it's better than the thing that it is curing. So it's still worthwhile, it's still in the patient's best interest to undergo chemotherapy. But of course, as an ethical company, it's important that we do conduct as much research into the effects on people as much as possible, because it would be no good for us as an ethical company to release a product that is going to harm the patients and also doctors, who are key stakeholders, who are the people who are going to be prescribing the products. They need to trust our products, and if they don't, then their own reputation is at stake, so they're not going to want to prescribe it. So the testing involves giving the drug to healthy volunteers who are paid for their participation in the trial. And this is to determine the side effects. Someone who is perfectly healthy, are they going to have any harmful side effects as a result of this? So this is a potential exam issue here. What if we provide a drug to some healthy volunteers who all get really ill as a result of the product? That's going to be a huge ethical issue. That's going to be something that we really need to deal with. We need to release statements. We need to take advantage of our various different public relations teams to ensure that the impact is minimized. So this is a big risk here, where the company is really putting itself out there when it undertakes these trials, because any truly negative result, or more negative than you would expect result, could have a big backlash on the company. But once the drug has passed the initial test for side effects, it can be tested on people who have the particular illness that it is trying to cure. And a large-scale study is carried out as a final check for the safety and effectiveness once it has been done on a smaller scale to save costs in the short term. It's going to be very difficult to do because, as it goes on to say here about the psychological placebo effect, which has been proven to be true, as in people thinking that something is going to have an impact on them can actually cause it to have an impact. It's not one of these things that is a myth. It actually happens. There is evidence to suggest the placebo effect is a real thing. And once it has gone through all this, it is finally released to the market. But it can cost billions in dollars to bring a new drug to the market when all the costs of development and testing are taken into account. And so this is why the pharmaceuticals are charged at such a high cost, because it costs billions to produce, and that has to be amortized into its sales price over the years of the cycle that it's going to be available to the market. And if it wasn't for that high price to pay for all of this, there wouldn't be the drugs in the first place. So you have to balance the ethics of selling it at a high price with the fact that if you didn't sell it as a high price, you wouldn't be able to undertake these processes in the first place. And we can't get rid of these processes. We can't have a situation where we're not testing drugs before they get released to the market, because no one would stand for that. So that brings us to the end of this first video, and you can see that even just looking at these first few initial pages of introduction, we've already brought out some key points. We know how important staff and knowledge are to the organization. We know the importance of information to this company, the importance of a good financial strategy because of the high costs involved in the initial stages where you're not going to be receiving any revenue for it. We also looked at the fact that they need to charge it as a high price to counteract this fact that certain products just aren't going to make you much money, and you've got to make a lot of money out of the products that are successful. Otherwise, you're not going to have a business. There's not going to be these products out there, and society as a whole will lose out because society won't be able to benefit from it. We've also looked at various key stakeholders, such as the regulatory systems, such as staff, such as the doctors who prescribe the products. We've also looked at strengths of the organization. They're a sizable organization. They have sales all over the world. They've been around for a while. They are a quoted entity, and they operate in a country where there is a code of corporate governance. So we've already picked out lots of potential exam issues as well. Questions over governance, questions over financial strategy, questions over ethics, questions over legal liabilities, questions over people perhaps getting injured during a routine drug testing process. So there's a lot to build on as we work through the rest of the video series. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to finish by just telling you a few things about the products that we produce here at Astranti and the ones that are part of our course. So these materials can all be purchased as part of the course or purchased individually. So we have our study text. We have 3 study texts for all the objective test exams. So 3 study texts for E1, P1, F2, F3, etc. But we also have the study text specifically for the case study exams, split into 2 parts. The first is about how to approach the exam, how to analyze the information, how to plan your answers, how to write your answers, and also the second part, which looks at the key theories from the objective test levels that are relevant to the particular case study. So if you are looking at P2, F2, E2 for the management exam, F3, P3, E3 for the strategic case study exam, and so on. We have our course videos, which look at how to plan your answers, how to manage your time effectively. These are the key reasons why people fail the exam. We have our Preseen analysis, which looks at the Preseen in a lot of depth, applies key information to that, and also concludes with the strategic analysis, where we look at the various different models in the CIMA syllabus and apply them to the case, and also the top 10 most likely issues to arise in your exam. Generally, we have a 70 to 80% accuracy rate on our top 10 issues. Our industry pack, which details in great depth the history and the current contemporary issues within the particular industry that the Preseen is based on. We also have 20 to 25 industry examples that you can use within your answers. We have mock exams that can be purchased with or without marking and feedback, where you can get some real exam practice in, look for the kinds of things that the examiner is going to bring up in the exam, and also get marking and feedback from expert markers who have marked for CIMA and for us for many years, who know exactly the kind of things that the examiner is looking for, exactly the kinds of mistakes that students often make, and can provide lots of detailed feedback to ensure that you improve on your performance. We also have our master classes, which are 2 day-long classes which look at all the key issues facing students in the exam. We will also go through live planning, showing you how to plan your answers effectively, how to write your answers effectively. Again, key things that cause people to fail the strategic case study exam, or any of the case study exams for that matter. And also, if you do sign up for our course, provided that you have filled out your forms, provided that you have submitted your mocks, provided you have done everything to show that you have really given it your all to try and pass this exam, we also offer a pass guarantee, giving a free resit to anyone who fails the exam.